Right, imagine standing up in Parliament and claiming that Brexit has badly damaged Britain's economy, that rejoining the customs union should be considered, and that the evidence is self-evident. And then imagine being absolutely demolished by actual economic data showing that Britain has grown identically to France and substantially better than Germany since Brexit. That is exactly what has just happened to David Lammy. The Deputy Prime Minister made outrageous claims about Brexit damaging the economy. A senior economist tore him apart with hard evidence. And now Lammy has been left completely silent, unable to defend his position. Stay with British royal family because this destruction of Labour's anti-Brexit narrative is spectacular. Quick favour, if you are already satisfied watching Lammy get demolished by facts, smash that subscribe button right now. Over 92% of you have not yet. It is completely free, takes 1 second, and genuinely means everything to us. Cheers if you did. Right, let us talk about how comprehensively Lammy has been destroyed. David Lammy has been slapped down after claiming Brexit had badly damaged our economy and that Britain could rejoin the customs union. The Deputy Prime Minister sparked fury last night as he suggested the government could break yet another manifesto pledge and begin reversing the 2016 vote. Another manifesto pledge broken. That would be what? The fourth? The fifth? Labour has broken so many promises at this point that it is genuinely difficult to keep count. Lammy said Britain should consider closer integration with Brussels, and that whilst rejoining the customs union is not currently government policy, it is self-evident that other countries had seen growth as a result of doing so. Currently, that is the key word, not currently government policy, which means it could become government policy tomorrow, which means Labour is keeping the door open to rejoining the customs union, despite explicitly promising not to during the election campaign. Lammy then made this absolutely bizarre claim. But you can see countries like Turkey with a customs union seemingly benefiting and seeing growth in their economy, and again, that is self-evident. Turkey. He used Turkey as his example, a country that has absolutely nothing in common with Britain, a country with a completely different economic structure, political system, and level of development. He looked at Turkey's customs union with the European Union and decided that was evidence Britain should do the same. That is not economic analysis. That is grasping at straws. Labour sources last night said the Prime Minister holds the same views as his deputy, so this is not just Lammy being reckless. This is official government position. This is Keir Starmer's view as well. They both believe Brexit has badly damaged the economy. They both believe closer integration with the European Union is the answer. They both want to reverse Brexit incrementally, whilst pretending they are not doing exactly that. However, Lammy's claims about Brexit hitting economic growth were dismantled by a senior economist this morning. Dismantled. Not challenged, not questioned, dismantled, completely destroyed. Julian Jessup, a fellow at the Institute for Economic Affairs, tore apart a recent pro-European Union paper that claimed GDP would have been approximately 8% higher if it were not for Brexit. He produced a chart showing the GDPs of the United Kingdom, France and Germany from 2014, revealing that the UK's growth has been identical to that of France since the referendum and substantially better than Germany's. Think about what that means. The United Kingdom has grown exactly the same as France. France, which remained in the European Union. France, which did not go through Brexit. France, which supposedly benefited from all that European Union integration. Identical growth. And the United Kingdom has grown substantially better than Germany. Germany, the supposed economic powerhouse of Europe. Germany, the engine of the European Union. Britain has outperformed Germany since Brexit. Jessup used a unicorn symbol to show where UK GDP would be on the chart, were it 8% higher. A unicorn. Because that claim is fantasy, it is mythical, it is completely detached from reality. He was essentially saying that the pro-European Union argument requires you to believe in unicorns, to believe in things that do not exist, to believe in hypothetical growth that has no basis in actual economic performance. Sharing a Substack article he wrote last week, Jessup described the pro-European Union argument as almost entirely wrong, not partially wrong, not somewhat misleading, almost entirely wrong. The UK economy has grown by about 12% since 2016, outpacing Japan, Germany, Italy and France. If you add another 8%, the UK would have been the fastest growing economy in the G7, bar only the US, and left its EU peers far behind. This would not be impossible, but it is surely unlikely. Think about that logic. For the pro-European Union argument to be correct, Britain would need to have been the fastest growing economy in the G7, except for the United States. Britain would need to have massively outperformed every European economy. That is not just unlikely, that is absurd. That requires believing Britain would have experienced unprecedented, miraculous growth if only it had stayed in the European Union. That is not economic analysis, That is wishful thinking dressed up as scholarship. Jessup argued that the paper by MBR, making absurd claims about hypothetical GDP growth, had Britain not left the European Union, had been based on comparisons to countries that have nothing in common with Britain, and ignored comparable countries like France and Germany. That is methodological fraud. That is deliberately choosing your comparison countries to get the result you want, rather than choosing comparable countries to get an accurate result. That is propaganda masquerading as research. Jessup concluded, in summary, my take is that the MBR paper is heavy on data and prior assumptions, but light on common sense. Heavy on data, light on common sense. That is the perfect description of most pro-European Union economic analysis. They produce mountains of data, complex models, sophisticated assumptions, and arrive at conclusions that make absolutely no sense when you apply basic common sense. When you look at actual comparable countries like France and Germany, the entire argument collapses. Earlier this week, Health Secretary Wes Streeting said he does not think the government is planning on reversing Brexit. Does not think. Not a definitive no, not a clear statement that Brexit will not be reversed. Just that he does not think that is the plan. That is weasel words. That is leaving the door open. After failing to rule it out, he continued with even more revealing language. Streeting said, I think we are looking at a new relationship with the European Union in which we want to both repair some of the economic damage done by Brexit, which I think is evident, was warned about in advance of the referendum, and the country, I think largely for reasons of sovereignty, and as the Brexit campaign slogan said, to take back control, people were warned about the economic harm, and there were lots of voters I spoke to who said, yeah, we get that, but I think it is worth it to take back control. Well, that has happened now. There is economic damage, and we want to both minimize that damage, but also, I think, get this country onto a better partnership with the European Union. Economic damage. He keeps saying economic damage, despite the fact that the United Kingdom has grown identically to France and better than Germany, despite the actual evidence showing that Brexit has not caused the economic catastrophe they predicted. He is still claiming economic damage, because that is the narrative. That is what Labour needs people to believe in order to justify reversing Brexit incrementally. On Monday, Nigel Farage slammed Sir Keir's attacks on Brexit, saying voters will not be fooled by the scaremongering. Writing in the Daily Express, Farage warned, according to Labour Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, the real blame for our economic disaster lies with the 17.4 million British people who dared to vote for Brexit in the 2016 EU referendum. Few will be fooled by Starmer's transparent attempt to shift the spotlight away from his Chancellor and her disastrous budget. And Farage is absolutely correct. This is transparent. This is obvious. Labour is trying to blame Brexit for economic problems that are actually caused by their own policies. Rachel Reeves has imposed record tax increases. The government has implemented growth-killing regulations. They have made Britain less competitive, not more, and rather than take responsibility for their failures, they are blaming Brexit. They are blaming the 17.4 million people who voted to leave the European Union. David Lammy's claims have been brutally destroyed by actual economic evidence. The data shows Britain has performed identically to France and better than Germany since Brexit. The argument that Britain would have experienced 8% additional growth is fantasy. The comparison to Turkey is absurd. The entire pro-European Union economic narrative has been exposed as propaganda rather than analysis, and Lammy has been left silent. He cannot defend his position. He cannot explain why Britain has grown identically to France if Brexit caused such terrible economic damage. He cannot explain why Britain has outperformed Germany. He cannot explain why the actual evidence contradicts everything he claims, so he says nothing. He makes his outrageous claims and then disappears when confronted with facts. That is the problem with Labour's Brexit position. It is built on lies. It is built on manipulated data. It is built on comparisons to irrelevant countries whilst ignoring relevant ones. And when someone like Julian Jessup comes along with actual evidence, with actual comparable countries, with actual common sense analysis, the entire argument collapses immediately. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one.